the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you are answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
This seminar is sponsored by BEM Systems, Brown & Caldwell, and brought to you by the Stevens Institute Center for Environmental Systems.
Well, thanks very much. I've spent most of my career doing remediation, basically doing environmental cleanups with kind of a focus on groundwater and hydrogeology. And I've been fortunate, in the latter part of my career to have an opportunity to teach a couple classes. So I taught a class a couple years ago at Colorado School of Mines in groundwater contaminant transport, and then got offered an opportunity to teach a class at Western Colorado University in sustainability transitions. And that's how I kind of got interested in this topic. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I would like to tell you, the title of my talk is Sustainability Transitions with a Focus on Energy. So in this talk, it's really kind of in three parts, okay? The first part is going to kind of be a framing of the problem, if you will, climate change, and this relation to energy consumption. The second part will be an example of a sustainability transition. How many people know what a sustainability transition is? Great. All right. How many people know about climate change? How many people think it's real? Okay, a couple deniers. Good. Good. I like a skeptical audience. I like a skeptical audience. So then we'll have an example of a sustainability transition from the early 1900s from the Netherlands. So we'll talk about that because the whole concept's kind of abstract. I think it makes more sense to have an example. And then we'll switch back to the energy and sustainability transition for energy question, and I'll give an example of how that could look for the US. So first of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about where I work. I work for Brown & Caldwell. It's an entirely environmentally focused engineering firm. Of the firms that fall into that entire all environmental category, we're ranked number 4 in size in the US according to ENR. About $400 million a year of revenue, 55 offices in the US. We are pretty much just, we got one office in Vancouver, Canada, so we've got a little outpost in Canada. And one of the cool things about BC is we're entirely employee owned. So I've really spent my career in 3 different engineering firms, spanning 30 some odd years. And I really like this structure. This is a really cool place to work. It's got a nice culture, treats employees really well, values employees. We work in the private sector enterprise, and my colleague over there, Jim Claffey, the good-looking guy, yep. We are organized around basically services for 5 different market sectors. So Jim actually manages our manufacturing sector. I manage mining. We have another sector on oil and gas and energy, another sector that's basically retail, and one that's food and pharma. So that's kind of how we're organized on the private side. And then our public side is really focused on the utilities, right? What we call the muni business, water, wastewater. So we're about 2/3 public and 1/3 private sector focused. Really nice company. And here's some of the things that we do. Like I said, it's 100% focused on environment and with a strong emphasis on water. And what I think that does for the company culture, it gives us a real sense of purpose. It's the kind of place where you show up and you work, and you're working with people who are excited to be there and like what they're doing. So that's one of the things I really think is nice about BC. I teach one class a semester at Western Colorado University, small state college in Gunnison, Colorado, in the southern Rockies, beautiful setting. The Masters of Environmental Management program is what I teach in. And I'm just going to let Dr. John, who's the department head there, tell you a little bit about the program, because he does a better job of it than I ever would. Is it coming up? Yep.
Welcome to the heart of the Colorado Rockies. My name is John Hausdorfer, and I direct the Master in Environmental Management programs at Western Colorado University. I'm here today to invite you to imagine a livelihood based on your values and how our master's program might help you get there. We offer a 2-year master's program here at Western. In the first year, you study interdisciplinary coursework like environmental science, environmental policy, while developing skills through courses in project management, in developing unlikely partnerships, and in building community coalitions for getting things done. In the second year of our program, we require you to complete a major 600-hour project in which you complete something, you get something done that meets the mission of an environmental or sustainability organization anywhere in the world. We've had students complete projects as far as Kenya, Costa Rica, Paraguay, all over the Gunnison Valley here in Colorado, across the West and across the United States. In that second year, you really develop that livelihood by trying on for size the career that might fit. We offer distance and residential programs. For distance students, if you have an environmental commitment somewhere else, a job, a long-term internship, we allow for you to complete our program from that job, from that place that you love, and to use that work you're passionate about as the basis of your master's project for us in the second year. If you're a residential student, you get the incredible learning laboratory of the Southern Colorado Rockies. We have a block schedule. We have courses in 10 and 5-week blocks to maximize your ability to truly engage with this incredible place. Our master's program offers 3 tracks depending on your emphasis and career interests. Our Sustainable and Resilient Communities track will prepare you for a career in climate action planning or sustainable food, energy, or water systems. Our Integrative and Public Land Management track will prepare you for a career with a public lands agency or for a career in private land conservation. Our Global Sustainability track will prepare you for a career in international sustainable development. We really hope you can join us here in the Rockies for our workshop. We don't think of this as a 2-year series of courses leading to a piece of paper. We see this as a 2-year workshop in which you cultivate that livelihood based on your values. And that workshop involves coursework from expert faculty from at least 13 disciplines. It involves deep connections with classmates who are already environmental professionals all over the world. It involves working closely with community stakeholders, making the decisions to protect our environments and build resilient and sustainable communities. Hope to see you in Gunnison, Colorado.
Yeah, it's a good place. Western is more of a, I don't know how you close that. Western is more of a liberal arts school, and I've spent most of my career, well, all my career in engineering, and my college days in engineering school and geophysics. So it's a really different environment, but I really actually enjoy it. And classes I've been teaching have been sustainability transition, which is kind of how got me started on this energy topic, and then ecological restoration. So really enjoy it. Really couldn't say anything good, and if you're interested, you should look into it. It's a beautiful spot. I'd like to start with this quote, and this is from President Barack Obama. And I'd like you all just to think about this for a moment. I'm not going to read it, but why do you think he said that? Why would this be the moment in time in history that you would choose to be born in? Well, if you look at GDP over the last 2 millennia, we've most certainly become wealthier, right? Wealth isn't always equated with happiness, but it can buy a lot of different things. So that's one thing we have going for us. We've used that wealth to extend our life expectancy. So here's the Industrial Revolution about right here, and about 50 years after that, things really started to take off. So we're living longer, and we've become more socially conscious. So this is public spending as a share of GDP. Again, here's the Industrial Revolution. It took a little while for it to kick off. Germany kind of led the bandwagon. But now you see a lot of industrialized countries spend between 20 and 25% of their gross national product on things like health, old age, family benefits, unemployment, and housing. So we've become more civic-minded. That's not what you usually hear in the public discourse, but this is what the data says. Always go back to the data. One of the things that's near and dear to my heart is that we're drinking clean water. And for a lot of history, we weren't. And when I talk about the sustainability transition in the Netherlands, I'll give you an example of what happens if you don't drink clean water. But we've used that wealth, by and large. Sub-Saharan Africa is probably the most outstanding exemption from that, to provide people with clean water. So what's the controlling factor for that? What has caused all that wealth? Well, some people would argue that energy is the common currency. That all that wealth, all that production, everything that occurred in the Industrial Revolution was because we were able to harness and store more energy. So the Industrial Revolution was really about our ability to exert greater stores of energy, greater flows in either mechanical or electrical processes. And we've been through several energy transitions throughout human history, right? This is nothing new. We started off, the only energy source we had was human-powered. And then we had animals, and wood, and biomass, and then coal. And this is about where the Industrial Revolution comes in. It was largely coal-fired. Then oil and natural gas, which are incredibly energy-dense, but have some unfortunate negative side effects. Renewable, nuclear, and then renewables. So the question is it going to change? The question is, what's it going to change to? Because if you look at history, it's a history of change. It doesn't stay static. It's not what the data says. So really, there's a strong correlation between human development, civilization, if you will, and energy use. And it's really the key pillar to economic development. But unfortunately, there's still 2 billion people on the planet that don't have access to electricity. So the energy transition that we're going to talk about today will be most dramatic in those places that currently don't have access to electricity, because you're going to see leapfrog technologies there. They're going to go straight, it's just like going straight to cell phones without ever having a landline, right? They're going to go straight to microgrids with renewables and battery storage, all these cool things we're going to talk about later on, without ever having, the coal-fired, grid-based infrastructure that we currently rely on right now. Energy growth was really high last year and continues to be robust. It was the highest in a decade. The fastest growing place in oil consumption are India and China. And energy growth is still largely fossil fuel dependent. And I'll show you a graph on that. In general, in the developed world, energy use is flat, slightly declining, and in the developing world, it's still increasing. And this just kind of shows the total energy consumption. Again, look at the similarity. If you don't think wealth and energy are correlated, look at the similarity between this curve and that one I showed you for wealth. They were on a different X scale, but believe me, it takes off at the same place. So there's a couple interesting things on here. I don't know if I have a pointer on here. You can see coal has kind of peaked. Coal peaked a couple years ago. That's the gray. You can see above it crude oil. That's the blue. It might be flattening out a little bit, but I was listening to some economists. I was at the Energy Transitions Conference. If you ever get a chance, it's a great one to go to. Last week or 2 weeks ago, they're predicting pretty strong oil demand through 2040. So oil's not going away under the current scenario. Natural gas growth has really boomed over the last 2 decades. And up there on the far right, in that little top part, is renewables, solar, wind. There's really it's not much of the total, right? And most of that total is actually hydropower. So right now, it doesn't play that big of a role. So that's the current, this is business as usual. When I talk about business as usual, that's doing this. This is what business as usual gets you from an atmospheric carbon point of view. it results in increasing CO2 levels. So pre-industrial revolution, we're at about 280 parts per million. We're currently at 400. And you can see that over the last couple of decades, it's been pretty much a linear increase. Last time we had 100 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was about 3 million years ago. Sea levels were about 65 feet higher than they are right now. With this current level of increase in carbon dioxide, at the end of the century, we'll probably have sea levels about 6 feet higher than they are right now. That alone is a dramatic impact. Have you seen what the city's going to look like? It's pretty crazy. That's business as usual. Okay? This just shows where the energy is used by sector. So energy here, the big blue is real electricity, and up here you have transport, that's crude oil. Those are probably the two biggest ones we're going to talk about today. So here's the facts. The science is settled. I'm sorry for those of you, well, I'm not sorry for those of you who are deniers, if there are any of you, because it is what it is. You know, you lost. You're in the same group as the flat earthers, people that denied the link between HIV and AIDS, and people didn't believe in plate tectonics. You're going to end up in the dustbin of history. We've already warmed up by a degree since the Industrial Revolution, and to avoid the worst impacts from global warming, we have to stay below 2 degrees C, total warming. We are on pace to rise by 4 degrees C. We're business as usual right now. So what we really need, and a lot of people say, oh, you know, you climate change guys, you want us all to go back to the Stone Age. And that's not what we need. We don't need an austerity program because we need more energy. We need those people that currently don't have electricity, which is probably 2 to 4 billion by the time you count in growth over the rest of the century. But we need a lot less carbon. So we need more energy. We need a lot less carbon. But right now, we're predicting strong fuel demand, crude oil demand through 2040. But one of the key is, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with what's going on in France with the Yellow Vest movement, right? When they tried to tax diesel, it's got to be affordable. You can't survive the end of the world if you can't make it through the end of the month, right? You got to be able to pay your bills. So affordability is key to whatever we're going to do. This happens to be what Al Gore calls the biggest opportunity of the 21st century, is that adapting to this climate change challenge is a huge business opportunity. The case I'm going to make today is not for a Green New Deal. It's for private sector-led with smart policy choices by the government to transform our energy economy. It's the biggest business opportunity of the 20th. This is going to make the dot-com boom look like a little baby. This is big dollars. If you look back here, we invested $1.8 billion in our energy sector in 2017. That's the type of money we're talking on an annual basis gets spent procuring this fundamental service for our society. That's what some people are saying. You know, you've heard about the Green New Deal and this big revolution we need. It's really actually not a revolution. It's called a sustainability transition. That's what we need. So what is that? First of all, if you take the time to listen to the whole song, and I really encourage it because the Beatles are wonderful, there's some real interesting truisms in there. One of the first things they say, if you want money for people with minds that hate, all I can tell you is, buddy, you have to wait, right? This is not tribal. This is not tribal. This is not us against them. This is not about ecologist versus industrialist, Republicans against Democrats, or being against the oil industry, or being against the energy industry. When I talk about sustainability transitions, it's about all aspects of society participating in change. Technology, markets, consumers, producers, policy, and I'll give you an example of that. When you say it's about the institutions, it is about the institutions. The institutions are what need to change. The socio-technical systems that we have that provide electricity from fossil fuel, mobility from internal combustion engines, those are going to change. Those are going to change, and there's going to be winners and losers because it's not going to be government-led, it's going to be private sector-led. people are going to make a lot of money or they're going to lose a lot of money, depending upon which side they bet. Yeah.
Are you an economist?
No. But I'm going to have some economist information.
Because it sounded like a zero-sum game.
No, but I am a capitalist.
Okay.
I'm a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, and I'm not advocating socialism. Yeah, yeah. Winston Churchill said, the problem with capitalism is it spreads its bounty unequally, but the problem with socialism is it spreads misery equally across everywhere. If you don't believe me, ask my friends from Venezuela. Anyway, that's the whole point about Chairman Mao, right? It's not a Green New Deal we're talking about here, right? The government's going to play a role in this transition. It's going to play a role by getting out of the way of the private sector and and plays a role by denying that there's a problem. That needs to stop. But really, it's the biggest business opportunity of the 21st century. So what is a sustainability transition? It addresses fundamental changes in the way society provides basic services. So how we procure food, energy, water, transportation, and moves how we produce and consume those services to more sustainable modes. And I'm just going to focus on energy today. But the whole concept, and this is a real active area of research in Europe. If you go up and you Google sustainability transition, you're going to find all kinds of papers from the Netherlands and Denmark and the UK and a few from North America, but it's really more focused in Europe. And the whole concept here is that a lot of the problems we're facing, not just climate change, but loss of biodiversity and depletion and degradation of environmental resources, are grand challenges that are related to unsustainable socio-technical systems, such as how we produce electricity and how we do mobility. And the concept is furthermore that we're not going to make change incrementally. There needs to be a dramatic shift in modes of both production and consumption. So some of the characteristics, they're multi-dimensional, nonlinear processes, a lot of feedback loops. So it involves technologies, markets, culture plays a huge role in this. Your value system plays a huge role in a sustainability transition. When I give you the Dutch example, you're going to see that. A lot of different actors, producers and consumers are central to it. Politicians, special groups, NGOs play a big role. I'll talk about that in the Dutch example too. It involves changing deeply ingrained systems. You know, I love my automobile, and I've loved it since I was a teenager. And most Americans do, but it's going to change. And there's going to be resistance to change because people don't like change. Some of the drivers of change can be political, social, technical, or economic. So let's go to an example. This is a great paper. If you ever want to nerd out and really read something geeky about sustainability transitions, it's just an awesome read. This transition from cesspools to sewers in the Netherlands, written by Giels, 2006. It's a great read. Now, my last name's Ellerbroek. That's a very Dutch name, so I have a lot of affinity for the Dutch. And when I think of Dutch people, I think of industrious, pragmatic, progressive, business-oriented. But this case here really shows how they were kind of a stick in the mud in terms of adopting closed sewer systems and treatment for human waste rather than having cesspools and privy vaults, you know, basically ponds that contained human waste in your backyard. So just kind of setting the stage, in the 19th century, mainly focused in Europe now, human waste, domestic waste, were really the biggest contributor to urban pollution, right? Cesspools, which were basically open pits in your backyard, and privy vaults, were where all your excrement went, were cleaned by private contractors and then sold to the agricultural industry. The point is, there was an industry around this. People made a living managing waste. It probably wasn't a great job, but they did it. Other waste was just deposited on the street, and a lot of people would just cut a drain from their cesspool to the local canal and just let the waste drain out there. So in 1851, they passed a municipal law that gave local cities control over managing human waste. Well, there's a couple things that were going on. They really didn't have a lot of participatory democracy at that time. Only 10% of the total population could vote. And the real focus was on growing the economy and keeping public spending low. Remember, I showed now that we're up around 20, 25. They were more around 10% of GNP. And why other cities made progress installing sewer systems, London, Paris, Berlin. There was some debate about the technology that should be used. It didn't happen in the Netherlands. But they had an early wake-up call in the mid-1800s when they had 2 outbreaks of cholera. Now remember, this is before people knew about the existence of bacteria, right? So they blamed these outbreaks on fumes, right? Bad odors. They didn't really know what caused. So there was a real disagreement about the role of science and government in solving this problem. So many people just saw the waste as a nuisance. And the analogy here is, you know, having human waste on the street is really no different than using the atmosphere as a sewer, right? For our automobile discharge. Same concept. Yeah, you just got to tolerate it, dude. Yeah, so what? You know, that's how they felt about poo back then. Public and medical professionals expressed concern. They didn't have any data, right? They didn't have any way to prove that this was causing some of these diseases. And it was seen as your own responsibility to take care of your health, right? It's not the public's problem. It's not the government's problem. You need to take care of yourself, right? So really the public involvement, even though they had the regulatory authority from that law, was really just cleaning up blockages and just keeping things flowing. But then a couple things started happening. Scientists started developing these death maps from the cholera outbreaks, because there was more than one cholera outbreaks. And they started correlating these. And originally they were published in technical journals, but then they got into the public press. And people started seeing the correlation between waste disposal and cholera outbreaks. So they suggested some improvements, clean up the drinking water. Oh, that's a radical idea. Removing human waste from the street. What are you, a hippie? Crazy freak? You're gonna ruin the economy. What about the guys that haul it? What about the farmers? Right? Sound familiar? So nothing happened. They just put more water in the canals to flush it out. But the problem got worse as the century went on. The reason the problem got worse is because the Industrial Revolution was getting steam and more people were moving to the cities. As more people move to the cities, you just magnify the problem, right? And the pressure from the medical community increased. And they had these debates about infectious disease, and the doctors started arguing pretty strongly that it was caused by contaminated water. And then Pasteur came along and discovered bacteria, and the science deniers said, how could that little bug that I can't even see make me sick? Are you crazy? Are you crazy? Scientists are freaks, right? So they didn't believe them. There was a lot of science denial. But then they developed coloring methods to show that these bacteria actually exist. The statistical correlation between bad hygiene and infectious disease became more and more obvious. And the public perception began to change. You remember I said a sustainability transition is really about a change in values, right? The value began to change. They started to believe the science, and the rhetoric came from these little bacteria you can't see to armies of microbes that are invading your body. All of a sudden, people really began to become energized about dealing with this problem. So the other thing that changes, and this is where I think we are at in our current energy transition. At this stage, the other thing that changes is the role of change, okay? And what happened was the doctors formed professional association, and the engineers formed professional associations, and those professional associations began to advocate to the public and to the government to make some of these changes and improvements that they suggested. The engineers in particular were widely respected, right? Because people had seen what they'd done with bridges and canals and railroads, and they're like, hey, these guys know what they're talking about, right? The hygienists had a professional society also, and the political agenda changed from everyone should be taking care of themselves to The socioeconomic equality were linked to those areas that had the worst hygiene, right? Because obviously they're going to have the worst conditions. Also at this point, there was a lot of technical innovation, a lot of experimentation, and I think that's what we're seeing right now in the energy industry. I mean, if you just follow it in the journals and stuff, all the new things that are coming out with solar, new types of solar cells, new types of battery storage, better wind farms. I really feel like this is the stage we are at in our energy transitions, where the experts are starting to be heard, and there's a lot of technical innovation happening, but we still don't have change yet. But gradually, the shift took place, and now we're almost at 100 years that this has taken place, whereas like in London, it was like 20 years, right? Urbanization increased, the protests became stronger, the pressure from cultural change, values changed, and this is the Dutch people I know. The ideology of cleanliness really emerged, and it really became a cultural value, and it was equated with virtuousness, respectability, and civilization, right? And when that value changed, that really promoted the dramatic shift within the policy and the implementation reams. The medical theories supported the need for cleanliness. Urbanites no longer saw filth as something they needed to tolerate, and there was a new civic spirit around solving this problem. So the role of government then changed. The public authorities began to be focused more on serving everyone rather than just the elites. The Department of Public Works, which was formed in the early stage, actually became infiltrated. It became taken over by sanitary engineers and hygienist doctors. So we talk about the institutions changing. The people who were pressuring it from the outside actually became the insiders on the inside implementing the change. Another thing that happened is agricultural saw a big change with the invention of artificial fertilizer. They no longer needed the human waste. New suburbs began to be installed with sewer pipes. Amsterdam finally had the sewer in 1913, and the rest of it had to wait until the 1830s. Some of the smaller cities actually didn't occur until after World War II. So what are some of the things we can learn from that? So there's a couple characteristics of regime change. One is that the insiders gradually change their cognitive beliefs. In this case, the Department of Public Workers changed their view from waste as something that should just be tolerated, it's a nuisance, to no, it's in the interest of the public good for us to deal with it. There was pressure from outsiders, in this case the hygienist, doctors, and the sanitary engineers, and eventually the outsiders became the insiders by the end of this transition. So that's an important lesson, I think. There are a lot of niche innovators, which is what I think we're seeing in the energy space right now. And a number of important changes occurred. First of all, they understood that infectious disease, and people started believing in science to solve the problem. The public perception of waste changed from being a nuisance or a valuable agricultural resource to a dangerous substance. The views on health shifted from individual to public responsibility, and behavioral changes occurred in the policymakers, from serving the elites to really be more sensitive to social issues and concern for the public good. Political ideology changed from minimal involvement to active intervention, and the whole morality of waste, the whole view of waste shifted from it being a normal thing to see on the street to having an ideology of cleanliness. And like I said, a lot of this was driven when the outsiders became the insiders. So given that as an example of what a sustainability transition looks like, what could it look like for the energy sector? Now, I'm not an economist. Amory's not an economist, but he's a great read. He's actually a physicist, and he's a founder of the Rocky Mountain Institute. And the next section of this paper on the energy transition is really borrowing very heavily from this paper, Reinventing Fire. And I really recommend everyone reading it. I think this is actually what's being incorporated into what five-year plan is China implementing now. They've actually used Amory as a consultant, big time. And they're basically doing a lot of what he's talking about here. So this is a quote from him. Fire made us human. Fossil fuel made us modern. There's no doubt about it. There's been tons of benefits from it. But now we need a safe fire, right? So it makes it safe, secure. That's something that's reliable and durable. So what does it look like? So some of these are my thoughts. It really involves increasing the energy supply, this energy transition. We're not talking about decreasing the amount of energy available for work. And it needs to stay the same cost or actually go down in cost. But the amount of carbon emitted needs to be drastically cut back. And much of that is going to occur through energy efficiency and resiliency. And it's going to be led by market forces and using existing technology. Everything that I talk about today is based upon stuff that we know we can do today. This could be based in economics, so there'll be winners and losers. And there's going to be some drastic changes in socio-technical systems. And these are the big three. They're really going to change. You're going to see this in your life. The grid's going to change, transportation's going to change, and buildings are going to change. Those are the three big areas that are going to drive this. So grids are going to have much more renewables. You get up to about 75%, right? There's going to be backup from battery storage and natural gas. So this is not fossil free. This is fossil low, right? Transportation is going to move to electric vehicles or other types of vehicles like run on biofuel or hydrogen. And there's going to be a lot more options around ride sharing and public transportation. And buildings are going to become about 75% more efficient. So 4/5 of the carbon that we put in the atmosphere comes from equally from two sources, from electricity production, which is about 2/5, and from crude oil burning, which is about 2/5. So that's 80% of the carbon, right? Of that electricity, 75% of that goes to buildings, 25% goes to industry. Of the oil, 75% of that goes to transportation. So you can see how these three areas really cover about 80% of the carbon budget for the atmosphere. We're not going to go around and have to catch cow farts, right? Okay, so what do we have today? Quite honestly, our energy system is a disaster, right? Our grid is inefficient, it's disconnected, it's aging, it's dirty, and it's insecure. It's a national security risk. If they can hack our elections, they can hack our grid, right? So this is the facts I already gave you. I'm sorry about that. So electricity and oil each put 2/5 of the total carbon in the air. 3/4 of the oil runs vehicles. 3/4 of the electricity runs buildings. So very efficient vehicles and buildings are a key part of this strategy. And then natural gas completely displaces oil and coal.
What's our position like compared to Europe, like the transition situation? Like we are way down here somewhere compared to Europe.
Oh, yeah. So compared to Europe, that's interesting. They've already talked about banning cars in some European cities. I think London is looking at banning internal combustion engine, and I think Germany is talking about banning. I think it's 2050. I can't remember the exact date, but they are moving ahead quicker on that. And then on the renewable side, Germany has gone much quicker than we had, and their grid is about 1 order of magnitude more reliable in terms of downtime than our grid. So this is some economists. These are the governors of the central banks of England and France, supported by a coalition of 34 central bankers, basically saying the companies that fail to adjust and the economies that fail to adjust, they just won't exist because the climate change events are going to damage infrastructure, private property, negatively affect health, decrease productivity, and destroy wealth. How much did Sandy cost? Yeah. So when the frequency of that starts to increase, it really adds up. So it's not just the economists, it's the business people. This is Royal Dutch Shell, again, my people. They're getting with it. They're the first major oil company to tie bosses' pay to reduction in emissions. So they're going to set specific targets every 3 to 5 years. with the goal of shrinking its net carbon footprint by 2050, by half by 2050, excuse me. They're also going to be reviewing their ties with lobbying groups bent on undermining climate change, right? So they're really disconnecting from this whole disinformation network that's out there. It's being sponsored by some of the oil companies. So I mentioned national security. Our grid's over-centralized, and it's subject to a bunch of vulnerabilities. If you don't believe me, ask the Pentagon, because this is what the Pentagon's doing. Their bases are going to be distributed, renewable-based, with backup, and they're going to be able to stand alone, because their stuff needs to work. So the Pentagon's already doing this. So what's the business case? We triple end-use energy efficiency. We go to 75% renewables. It costs $5 trillion less than the status quo. Those aren't my numbers. Those are Amory's numbers. If you want to get into the numbers, go read the paper. I'm not going to defend the numbers. He's a smart guy, and I believe him. We'd support an economy about 58% larger than the current economy, with no coal, no oil, no nuclear. Benefits, there's some here for everybody, right? I go into more on the next page, but we're going to have job growth in terms of renewables, manufacturing, new cars, construction, new buildings, and engineering and technology. Yay, lots of jobs for us. Increases national security, right? No more oil wars. Resiliency, we have a more stable and efficient grid. We have independence. This is a big one to me. I have solar on my house. I like producing my own energy. It's cool. You know, I like selling it back to the grid operators. That's cool too. You know, and if I want to operate my little system a different way, add an extra cell, take a cell down, do something different, plug my car into it, it's my choice. To me, that's an American value, independence. And then national competitiveness. We have lower cost energy. And look, all this is done without a carbon tax, this whole scenario. It's even more efficient if you put in a carbon tax. It makes it work faster. That's just my opinion, not Amory's. But if you want to be competitive on a national basis on trade, tax embedded carbon. Implement this plan in tax embedded carbon. Our manufacturing industry will be the most competitive in the world. So anyway, so I did a business case, you know, cost, and I'll do schedule. $5 trillion less. The cost is even less if you include the price of carbon, which isn't in the analysis. Basically, electric cars are going to cost about the same as internal combustion by 2025. Wind and solar already beat the pants off coal-fired and gas power plants. Businesses that adjust and grow will profit, and those that don't will suffer. And that's not my quote. That's the chairman of Dow Chemical. Okay? And this is what it looks like. So this is Amory's summary graph from his Reinventing Fire paper. So the top line is business as usual. And then he has efficient technologies. So from about the blue, the green, and the gray is the building side of it. So that's the energy savings. And then there's the renewables, a little bit of hydrogen. You can see natural gas still plays a role, right? I think in this scenario, we use 1/3 less. It actually decreases, but it makes up about the same percentage overall. But coal and oil pretty much get phased out. And this all happens by 2050. And this paper was written a couple years ago. So summary and conclusions, this transition's already underway. And if you kind of look back at the Dutch case, you know, I'd say we're about midway through it. If you try to draw some analogies, you know, we're starting people's opinion. This is why I go out and do these talks. I'm passionate about this. I'm passionate about the planet, right? I don't want to trash the planet. I'm going to have grandkids someday. I want the planet to be livable. Sustainability be led by good public policy and for-profit business. It's not a Green New Deal. The government's not going to lead. They're going to set some policies and get out of the way, because the most efficient way to do this is through for-profit business. We'll be completely off oil, coal, and nuke. We could be, excuse me, by 2050, and hold the share of natural gas about the same. We save about $5 trillion. We grow the GDP by 158%, and we cut fossil carbon emissions by about 80%. So that's my story. Okay. Thank you.